So I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Hayley is the founder and CEO of ThriveHire, and I will pass it over to her to speak about some steps that you can take to take advantage of this time and use it to still advance your career in global health.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Lauren. And thanks for your great insights, Anna. It's not an easy time at all to navigate. So it's been super insightful to hear your thoughts. So just next slide. So yeah, as Lauren mentioned, I'm happy to provide some tips of how you can navigate a really precarious market right now with COVID-19. So just a quick outline. I'm going to first summarize just general sort of the hiring/internship landscape during COVID-19. And this is specifically based on some findings that we've gathered from our employer partners at ThriveHire, and also some secondary research that we've done as well. And then the bulk of the presentation, I really just want to focus on some tangible tips that you can apply when it comes to actually navigating the hiring landscape this summer. So just next slide. Yeah, so I guess the magic question is COVID-19 leading to layoffs of employees or cancellations of summer internships within the global health community? And based on what we've gathered so far, the answer is very mixed. If you just go to the next slide there. So we've definitely heard from some of our partners that many organizations are indeed experiencing hiring freezes. Others are laying off employees altogether. In fact, one of our partners has already had to lay off 45% of its workforce. And then in addition, we've also heard back from some organizations that are pausing all of their operations altogether. And in terms of seeing the long-term impacts of that, if they'll be able to survive through this, time will tell. So I don't want to give anyone false hope. It is difficult across a lot of industries, which I know everyone on the call is familiar with, but that is some of the initial findings that we've come across. With that said, if you go to the next slide, when it comes to internships, it's a little bit all over the place. So I would say so far what we've come across, it seems to almost be an even split. So some of our partners are taking on summer internships. They're continuing with the internships that they were already in the process of finalizing, and they're just moving everything virtual and online. One of the biggest things that we've heard that are really impacting the capability to do this is whether or not these organizations secured government funding. So I guess that part's encouraging. And then on the flip side, we have indeed heard from some partners as well that have had to just halt their summer internship programs for the time being. One thing I just want to mention here, because I am starting it off, I guess, a bit practical, and I know it can be a bit intimidating, but one thing to consider is when you're researching different organizations, if an organization right now is primarily focused on services, so for example, let's say most of their revenue is based on in-person events, then they're more likely to be negatively impacted, of course, by COVID-19. Or perhaps if you're targeting organizations that are rather big and a lot of their services are done virtually, perhaps you could switch some of your focus towards organizations that do work in those areas. So I do just want to keep that in mind when you're researching some different opportunities. If you go to the next slide. One thing to consider with this is it's not all negative. Of course, we're in the middle of a major global health crisis. And one thing I do want to emphasize is simply the funding streams within global health is shifting. And so while there are indeed a lot of big impacts, some of them, of course, are negative implications within some organizations, different companies and individual researchers are now getting new funding streams. And of course, within this, there's a huge focus now on infectious disease research and global health security. I've just included a few different sources. This is by no means exhaustive, but just for instance, the Canadian government is funding, of course, funneling millions of dollars into COVID-19 research and countermeasures or global and humanitarian assistance programs to try to combat COVID-19. So it's again something to consider when you're researching different opportunities in organizations. Perhaps go on these governmental websites, see where they're funding, start contacting those organizations, because they actually are getting an influx in activity. If you go to the next slide there. One last thing I'll just mention at the start of this is, I think, of course, as we're all seeing, this is going to have some really big long-term impacts within the global health community. There's some great advantages with this, like for instance, global health, public health is finally getting attention, and people are talking about health systems in ways that I never expected the general public would when I was doing my Master's of Public Health degree. I think that's ultimately something that we can really try to leverage within our work. Something else is quite interesting. This is truly global in scope. We're all encountering sort of this shared suffering right now. And I think something that's been interesting is in the past within global health work, sometimes we've had to really advocate and lobby to really emphasize the need for, say, individuals in Canada to support programs and initiatives in low-income settings. But as we're seeing right now with COVID-19, what happens in China or where I'm currently based in Rwanda absolutely has impacts within health systems across the world. And this is ultimately something that I guess we don't have to argue or try to fight for as much as we previously did. So that's something, really great to consider. One thing I do want to emphasize, I have no answer to this. There's probably people on the call that have more insights about this than I do. I guess the big question is, will COVID-19 counterintuitively lead to spikes in nationalism? I don't really know, but it's something we need to be very cognizant of, be vigilant, try to advocate against, because ultimately through this, people might come forth with some arguments that, we need national security and why should we invest in global assistance and development programs. And so we need to come up with some really solid arguments to make sure that we really are coming together as a global community. With that said, slide. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you just cut out momentarily. So if you just want to go back about 30 seconds, maybe.
Perfect. Yeah, no problem, Lauren. So yeah, I was just mentioning so if we go to, I don't know what you heard last, but I was just mentioning one thing we need to consider with COVID-19 is it could lead to spikes in nationalism. And so we really need to come together as a global community to really emphasize the importance of continuing to funnel investments and have greater infrastructure within health systems across the globe. So that's just something that we need to be cognizant of that could influence the global health landscape. So if you move to the next slide, with that said, I know this is quite overwhelming, but one thing, I want to keep in mind is that when it comes to searching for jobs, no matter how hard your job search is, keep at it. This is a great quote I came across that, no matter how many times you might hear a no, soon, eventually you'll hear a yes. And so, just keep in mind that things even like this, they're temporary and you're going to get through it. And to Anna's point earlier, you can learn actually a lot through this and become more resilient. So with that said, if we go to the next slide, I'm happy to provide just a quick overview of some general tips and things that you can think about when you're trying to navigate some different opportunities. So the first is, I would say, get really creative in your job searches. Expand your options in the pool of opportunities and organizations that you're looking into. Perhaps you graduated from your bachelor's or master's recently, you were looking at a very specific area within global health. It might be the time, of course, to maybe, pivot a little bit and focus perhaps on looking into opportunities that focus on infectious disease research, for instance. Or another thing, maybe you're looking at, traditional nonprofits. There's actually a lot of health startups that are getting increased investment opportunities right now to try to respond to COVID-19. Perhaps that's something that's a little bit less conventional in global health that you can also look into. One thing too, again, expanding your opportunities. You can always look into research gigs with professors and people that you already know that are in your network. So don't overlook leveraging that. And another thing too, it's completely acceptable, I would say actually at any point, but especially during a pandemic, to pursue opportunities in even an unrelated job that's not within global health, because you're always going to get transferable skills. So next slide. Now more than ever is probably the time to try to increase your online presence. So for instance, you can try to really post comments on professional groups, boost your visibility, try to get people becoming more aware of your name, really refine your LinkedIn profile. And it's great to see all of you on the line today. It's great to attend virtual events like this. You never know who you may meet. So I've included some resources of some various areas that you can explore to get connected to global health events. Another way to boost your online presence is write a blog. You can get one started, or for instance, at ThriveHire, we post blog articles. We've been posting quite a few on COVID-19 lately. So if you want to improve, again, your online presence and get some more publications out there, you're welcome to get in contact with us. So next slide. So network is very important, and even now it can be quite awkward doing it all virtually, but it's important to keep going at it. So a big thing is reach out to people through emails or LinkedIn messages. I've included a resource here if you want to get an idea of a general template that you can follow. It's best to make it short and concise. And within this, one thing I want to emphasize is, I guess to make it a little less awkward, always try to build rapport with the person that you're speaking to first. So ask questions, make it about them. I would highly not recommend going up to someone, right out of the blue and saying, "Are you hiring anyone?" Just start to get to know them a bit first. Ask them, for instance, how things are going at their organization. Is COVID-19 affecting some of their programming? Or perhaps what some of their opinions on how some of their work and projects are going to change in the future as a result of COVID-19, and stay in touch with them. You never know where it may lead you, so it's really important to continue networking. Next slide. Tailor your resume. If you have a bit of extra time, especially now that exams are wrapping up, you can always get your CV reviewed. So you can ask a friend, a colleague, a family member if you're interested. We're now at ThriveHire just starting to offer this service in addition to some mock interviews. So you're welcome to check us out. But of course, there's also people within your network as well that you can get some insights on your resume for. Next slide. Once you're actually ready to start applying for opportunities, I've included a few different resources of some areas or websites, I should say, that you can look into for some specific global health postings. In addition, I found a portal, this one's focused just in Ontario, but it is specifically posting COVID-19 related jobs and volunteer opportunities. There's lots in different regions of the globe as well that I would highly recommend looking into if you have any specific skill sets that you can offer. Within this, when you're submitting applications, the regular rules always apply. So be sure once you've submitted an application, always include a personalized note, an email right away saying you're really privileged to apply for the opportunity and you're looking forward to hearing back from them. Do your homework, make sure you're customizing your applications to every single opportunity, and dress appropriately. So yeah, the regular rules apply. Next slide. One thing, of course, to be mindful of is, do expect longer job search times. It's, of course, the job market is being affected across all industries, so do be mindful of that. But perhaps in the meantime, you can really try to boost some of your skills. So for instance, you can take online courses, massive open online courses. There's lots of them. Plenty of them are 100% free, which may be a great thing to explore. And in addition, you can always volunteer. So for instance, if you have this one target organization, that would be the ideal place and environment that you'd like to work at. Reach out to them right away and, just mention up front that you're very cognizant. It's a very difficult time. you're not sure how COVID-19 is impacting their programming, but you're more than happy to volunteer some hours to ultimately better improve some of their services. So it could be a great opportunity to volunteer, and ultimately through that, you're getting the connections that you need, that once an opportunity comes up and arises, they're ultimately familiar with your name. Moving right along to the next slide. One thing I want to emphasize is it's really important to stay healthy. Don't underestimate the toll that this can have, and don't be too hard on yourself. I don't know about each of you, but sometimes I'm my own worst enemy. So I think, one thing just I want to emphasize here is, be patient with yourself. It's completely acceptable during a pandemic to take some time for yourself. So do recognize it's a process. One thing too is you can see if you qualify for government benefits, to just try to decrease some of the economic implications this is having in your own livelihood. So do look into those, and exercise regularly. It's a really important part of trying to navigate any stressful situation. Next slide. Just wrapping up things here, it's okay, it's completely okay to go to plan B. This can be during a pandemic or really any point in our lives. I kind of loved this image I came across. If plan A doesn't work, there's 25 more letters in the alphabet. So it's completely acceptable to go to plan B. And this just goes to my last slide here, which is when you're navigating all of this, it's important to think long term. This is one of my favorite quotes by Nelson Mandela. As he puts it, I never lose, I either win or learn. So within this, try to almost take a step back and ask yourself, for instance, what are you learning through all of this? As Anna said, she's got clearly a great attitude. She's trying to already think about ways that she can grow within this. And so, for instance, ask yourself, perhaps in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, what is something that you tell a future employer that you learned through COVID-19? Taking the time to reflect, and again, recognize that this is a process and it's temporary, but having that growth mindset can really take you a long way. So with that said, thanks so much. I hope this has been helpful, and yeah, happy to answer any questions you may have.
That was fantastic, and I think aligns nicely with what I will be talking about, focusing in on how to interview virtually. So my name is Alli, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Operations at CanWaCH. As a little bit of a background about me, I went to the University of Ottawa and have my undergrad in International Development and Globalization, and then have a Master's in Global Development Studies, and have somehow found myself managing human resources at CanWaCH, which I don't think I had initially foreseen in terms of my own career journey. But I think it only highlights and showcases the ways in which we need to be adaptable, to focus in on transferable skills as we enter into the workplace, and to reflect on the fact that sometimes our careers take interesting pathways, and that it's all stepping stones to the next positions that we look forward to as well. So I think when we look at some of the trends that we're seeing in hiring practices right now, especially in terms of CanWaCH's approach to hiring, as a completely virtual organization that has no brick and mortar anywhere in Canada, we all work from home offices. There have been some things that we've learned over the past few years in terms of how to hire in a virtual workplace, that I think we're seeing more and more across the nonprofit sector now. So we're seeing an upswing in virtual hiring, virtual orientations, organizations that are adapting within COVID-19, but I think we'll see this trend continuing on into the future as well in many instances. We also know that the job market is increasingly competitive as well. There's more and more grads, more and more people who know that this is the career that they want to take and the pathway that they want, but not necessarily matched with always the type of growth in the job market at the same time. So we know that we need to put our best foot forward at all moments too. So when we look at what an interview is, we wouldn't go run a marathon without training. At least I definitely would not. And I wouldn't walk into an interview without also doing my homework and my research and training my interview muscles at the same time. So if we look at an interview as one part within a life course of going from building the skills and experiences to build up your resume, to building up a resume that is really tailored to a job description, to receiving an actual interview, there's some specific things that we can do to tailor and hone our interview muscles. Thanks for flipping this slide. So before you interview, there's a couple things that you can do to build up your muscles. One of the things, especially within a virtual context, is to take the time in advance to test your technology and test your systems. So most of the operating systems, if you know that you're going to be operating in a virtual interview, you can head on, test your video, test your audio, test your sound, sign on with your friend onto Zoom or onto Skype and make sure that everything is set up really well. When you get an interview, you will likely have limited time in which to prepare for an interview. But really, what makes for an excellent interview, no matter whether it's in person or virtual, is practice, practice, practice. And you can practice certain things before you actually know that you have a specific interview. So there's whole data banks online that you can just search for typical interview questions, where you just run through and you practice. Pull in your mom, your best friend, your colleague, and sit down for a half hour at the kitchen table or on your Zoom call, and practice answering interview questions, just your typical generic interview questions. When you actually have an interview that you're preparing for, though, you need to make sure that you are researching. And I can't highlight this enough. The people who have really impressed me in interviews are those who've demonstrated that they, A, know the job description really, really well, and B, know the organization well, that they are thinking proactively about how they fit within the organization at the same time too. So what this actually looks like is reading through the job description line by line and looking at what you would think or what you could see typical interview questions being for this position. So if you have a policy-focused job description versus a gender-focused versus a comms-focused versus a research-focused, the types of questions that will be asked will be slightly different, but you can assume that you will have behavioral questions, where they'll be trying to assess whether you're a good fit, situational questions where it's what would you do if, and then there will be specific expertise questions as well that they will be asking you. So you can try to come up with a list of questions of things that you think they could be asking. There's also data banks online for this as well, and practice your answers. Write down jotted points about what you would want to use as an example. Come up with like an example database of different experiences that you've had and how they would fit within this job in this context. Next slide, please. During the interview, what I would recommend is signing on early to make sure that you're on and prepared. There are very few people who actually just miss an interview, but it might be that they're signing on right as you sign on and their technology isn't quite working. And you can put your best foot forward by being there, being on time, being early, being prepared, making sure that all of your technology works. And then also having a chance for you to also just take a deep breath before everything starts as well, because interviewing can be a little bit nerve-wracking. I think in particular, when you're looking at a virtual interview, it's hard to really read body language and be friendly. There's less of the opportunity for that little quick banter back and forth and social conversation at the get-go. And you need to remember that all they can see is from your shoulders up. So they can't see you nervously twiddling your fingers, which is probably good. But at the same time, if you have a somewhat neutral expression on your face, they can't tell whether you're engaged or not. So it's up to you to be more proactive in your body language. I've noticed, say, Daniel has been nodding his head as I'm speaking and as Lisa was speaking as well. And that goes a long way in terms of creating rapport, even if it's online as well. So little things like that, as well as at the very beginning, jump in with a question of, even if it's, can you guys hear me okay? Is my audio okay? Just testing the ground and creating a little bit of a rapport goes a long way when you're actually going then through the interview. as you're doing the interview, take notes. Nobody is going to dock you points for wanting to take the time to be thoughtful in your responses, especially if questions are asking you, for example, in this situation, what are the 3 things that you would do? If you're not noting down what those 3 things are as you're talking and as you are wrapping your brain around the response, you may forget one. And that will be noted by the interviewer. So take the chance to write down your 3 things, even if it's just one word for each, or write down the number 3, just so that you know that you're fully answering the questions. What I would also say is that in your responses, you want to make sure that you're really targeted and concise in your responses. This is not the moment to talk about your grandma or your past weekends and what you've done. It's really about the job and the job description and how your expertise fits within that. So as concise as possible is best. I know sometimes when we get nervous, we tend to babble or we tend to talk a lot, but keeping it concise, keeping it targeted, will go a long way, because it also then provides you the opportunity to, at the end, ask questions. On to the next slide, please. So when you are done at the end of the interview, you will likely have a portion of time when you get to ask questions as well. And I can't highlight this enough, that come with prepared questions. Come with questions that you want to ask, in particular to workplace culture, and how they manage their employees, how they treat performance reviews, how they integrate X into their organization. It can be about the actual job, but about how what type of organization you want to work for. And it can be a little bit nerve-wracking when you're first starting on your career to think through, well, what are the questions that I even want to ask? And they can be as generic or as particular as possible. So have a list of, say, 5 that you can pull from online. There's, again, data banks about questions to ask at the end. Make sure that you have some set questions. And if possible, as the interview is happening, pull out 1 more question, 1 or 2 more questions that you want to follow up on. This also gives you the opportunity, if there's anything that you feel like you haven't highlighted enough in the interview, or anything that you feel you have missed or haven't fully articulated, this is your chance to circle back as well and say, you know, I just really want to highlight X. And then I think that there is no harm in demonstrating that you're excited by the opportunity, you're excited by this position, you're excited by meeting potential colleagues, and at the end to say thanks and follow up by email as well. I think that's one of the key things that people often forget, is write that short little email within 1 day, within 24 hours. It doesn't need to be long. It could be connecting in, say, if you were talking about a particular research topic, you could share an article that you had just been reading. Or if you were talking about, we had someone recently who shared a UN process that we had been talking about in the during her interview. And it actually goes a long way to show that there's that continued interest, that demonstrated initiative, and how they would be a good fit within the workplace because they really care about this position and care about this job. But that interview email afterwards goes a really, really long way. And then at the end, it's about just really highlighting your skills and keeping it targeted, keeping it relevant to the job as well. And I think that's really the key. And I think I'll leave it there. I'm really curious about your questions and happy to answer anything. And I also have a passion for writing really strong resumes at the same time on the same type of model of making it targeted and tailored, especially within a competitive work environment as well.